All right, well, good morning. Welcome to our final installment of our series, Insider Trading. I'm curious if you can remember the two reasons why we've been calling this message series Insider Trading. The first reason is this: everybody is investing their life in something. And the second reason is Jesus has given us insider information. He's given us all that we need so that we can invest our lives well. And when we talk about investing our lives, your life, my life, we're talking about something that matters. There is a lot on the line. And so our series thesis has been a kind of sobering reminder: not all investments are equal. Now, I think this is probably true of all of us in the room, those of you who are joining us online. We all kind of just naturally drift towards the things that we believe are going to give us the most value, sense of significance, the greatest joy. But that's not the same thing as naturally drifting towards the things that will actually give us the most value, the greatest sense of significance, and the most joy. And so throughout this series, what you've heard me say is this: the words of Jesus are controversial sometimes because his words can be confrontational. Jesus confronts us with reality. And my question for you today is this: would you be willing to give him permission to confront you today with what we're going to talk about? Does he have permission to confront you? Now, as you're gearing up for that, I want to start off by asking this question: what does it mean to be free? And this word right here, this is something that lots of people disagree on. We probably share some disagreement over exactly what this means. People who want to interpret this question politically, there's lots of disagreement. And this word is at the heart of heated debates over mandates and recommendations and policies right now, isn't it? But one day when COVID is just a distant memory, people are still going to fight over what this word means and how to achieve it. People disagree over this word theologically. Now, this word freedom is at the heart of debates between people who lean Calvinist and people who lean Arminian. And if you don't know what those words mean, just ignore that I just said that. But whatever category you want to answer this question from, and from whatever perspective inside that category, we're probably going to discover that there's some disagreement. But does it really matter what your preferred definition is or what my preferred definition is? Isn't it true that this is something that every single one of us want? We all want to be free. And because it's such a universal desire, it should not surprise us that this is something that Jesus talked about. And it probably shouldn't surprise us by now, if you've been a part of this series, that Jesus had some choice and controversial things to say about freedom. And today we're going to jump into what I think is probably one of the most tense, socially awkward conversations that Jesus ever had. But before we jump into that, I want to give you a preview of what freedom looks like in the gospel. This is freedom in the gospel. This is what freedom looks like in Jesus' kingdom under his authority. It is the intersection of what we ought to do, what we want to do, and what we're able to do. And when those three things come together, that's when we are most free. Take away any one of these things, you have something less than freedom. And I say that knowing full well, there's probably people in this room or probably people watching online, and you're leaning towards this. No, Rick, the way to be free is to get rid of this. And there have been lots of smart people, there have been lots of philosophers who've said the way to truly be free is for no one to tell you what you ought to do, to get rid of external moral authority. Certainly don't let a religious person or a religious institution tell you what you ought to do. But if you take away ought to, I think what you'll discover, if you go down that road, you'll discover something less than freedom. And I think what you're going to discover is being enslaved by your own desires. That's an irreligious approach. If there's anyone like me and you come from a religious background, here's the religious approach. No. We don't get rid of ought to, we get rid of want to. It doesn't matter what you want to do, just do what you ought to do and you will be free. Go down that road long enough and I think you will discover something less than freedom. I think what you will discover is what it's like to be enslaved by duty. This is freedom in the gospel. This is what freedom looks like in Jesus' kingdom under his authority. It is the intersection of what we ought to do, what we want to do, and what we're able to do. That is when we're most free. So we're going to come back to this later. Right now, we're going to jump into John chapter 8, and we're going to look at what I said, I think it's kind of one of the most socially awkward, uncomfortable exchanges Jesus ever had with people. Is there anyone in here who does not like conflict? You want to avoid conflict. All right, this is going to be rough for you, man. All right, you might wince as we read through this, right? But just hang with me. John chapter 8. To the Jews who had believed in him. Just remember that. Just put that in your back pocket. Hold on to that. He's talking to the Jews who had believed in him. Jesus said, if you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Now, that probably doesn't feel too provocative yet. But imagine if someone came up to you and said, I've been getting to know you. I've been watching your life for a while, and basically this is what I've noticed about you. Your whole life is structured like a slave. You're not free, and I don't think you figured out how to get out from under the control of forces that are not good for you. You giving that person a hug? Does that feel like a compliment? When Jesus said this, people were instantly insulted. They answered him, we are Abraham's descendants, and we have never been slaves to anyone. You don't know me, bro. You don't have any right to say that to me. How can you say that we shall be set free, that we need to be set free? Now, instantly defensive. How many of you guys have ever watched someone, they're so defensive, they just uncork their mouth and stupid stuff flies out? And you've seen that before? Right? Okay, we might be talking about last Thursday. I don't know for you. But this is what happened. There's a historic and an immediate irony that's taking place right here. Sometime after Abraham, they were slaves in what country? Egypt. You've all seen the movie. It's like a key feature of their history. It's like the New England Patriots saying they never cheated, right? We know what's up. You've been slaves lots of times. And here's the painful irony. When they said this, when these words spilled over their lips, they were living under Roman occupation. They weren't even free when they said it. Now, as we're reading through this passage today, this is my hope, that we will see Jesus and that we will be in awe of him. But this is also my hope, that we will better understand ourselves and will be humble. When we read something like this and these people are just saying nonsense out of defensiveness, it's easy to think they're here and I'm here. But I think we're all kind of right here. Now, this is my aha lean-in moment that I want to invite you into. Are we like them? There is this common vulnerability that we share to cognitive dissonance and confirmation bias. And what that means is there's just something in our makeup that we naturally want to elevate what we want to be true over what is actually true. Can you relate to that? Let me tell you what I want to be true. That eating Chick-fil-A chicken nuggets will give me a six-pack. Want to be true. Not true. Live like it's true. Not true. Now, if Jesus were a lesser man, he would have just responded by arguing with them about what idiots they were for saying something that was clearly not true. That's what I would have done. But Jesus is not a lesser man. He is God in the flesh, and he is truth. And he takes truth, and with love and grace, he presses home the heart of the matter. Jesus replied, very truly I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. He's being loving and gracious, but he is not backing off of difficult things for them to hear. Everyone who sins is a slave to sin. Now, a slave has no permanent place in the family, but a son belongs to it forever. So if the son sets you free, you will be free indeed. You think you're in a family, but you're not. You think you're free, but you're not. You need to be set free. And what Jesus was saying to them, and I think he's saying it for us too, is when it comes to moral truth and when it comes to what we ought to do, we miss the mark. We miss the mark, but it's worse than that. I think Jesus is saying to us, we're all entangled in beliefs, behaviors, and attitudes that contradict and violate God's goodness. We're all entangled in beliefs, behaviors, and attitudes that contradict and violate love and what is best for us. We are stuck, we are entangled, and we can't break free. Now, we're in a church on Sunday morning, so I think it's fairly safe to say there are people in this room watching online who say, yep, I'm convinced that that's true. But I'm also pretty sure that there are people in the room and watching online who would say, I'm not convinced that that's true. And I've had friends who said, I'm not going to your church anymore because you teach that that's true. They feel insulted by it. And if you can relate to that even just a little bit, I'm going to put a statement on the screen, and you tell me if you disagree with that statement. Anytime we struggle to start or stop a habit, it's a reminder that we're not our own masters. Anybody got any experience with this? Anybody got a perfect track record with new habits? How do we explain that? What do we call it when we know what we ought to do and we know it's good for us, and we just say, I'm not going to do it. Listen, I get it. I get that there's something inside of us that says, I don't want to call that slavery to sin. I hear you. I don't think you can call it freedom. Jesus continues. I know that you were Abraham's descendants, yet you are looking for a way to kill me. I told you, this is an awkward conversation. You are looking for a way to kill me because you have no room for my word. And this is the crux of the matter. And this is the crux of the matter that we're going to see today, that our slavery and our opposition to Jesus has everything to do with our relationship with his word. You ever in a group and everybody's breaking up to go jump in cars, and you go to jump in one car and the driver says, oh, we're full, we don't have room for you. Anybody experience that? Feels awesome, right? Is your life structured in such a way that sometimes you would just have to say to Jesus' word, I don't have room right now? Or is your life structured in such a way that his word is treated like an honored guest? I'm telling you what I have seen in the Father's presence. And you are doing what you have heard from your father. And they just responded, Abraham's our father. It's like Jesus is trying to talk and they're heckling him. They can't even listen. They got to throw back an objection. And Jesus is communicating his divine authority. I am from God, and I am telling you the truth. And they couldn't hear it. They couldn't slow down and just listen. And this is one of those moments where I feel like is this describing me? This is a moment of caution for me and maybe for you too. Spiritually immature, emotionally immature people react. Spiritually immature, emotionally immature people accuse and object. Spiritually immature people, emotionally immature people, their instinct is to argue. Spiritually mature and emotionally mature people respond by asking questions. If this was a spiritually mature crowd and an emotionally mature crowd, they would have said, whew, that's hard to hear, Jesus. What do you know that I don't know? It's hard to hear, Jesus. What do you see that I don't see? What is it that convinces you that it's necessary for me to hear this right now? Fortunately, Jesus was not derailed by their combativeness and their immaturity. And because he was full of love and grace for them, and love and grace for us, he shared why he said what he said. If you are Abraham's children, if you were who you think you are, then you would do what Abraham did. As it is, you are looking for a way to kill me, a man who has told you the truth that I heard from God. Abraham did not do such things. You are doing the works of your own father. And I think what Jesus is saying to this crowd is the story that you're telling yourself about yourself is not true. The story you're telling yourself about yourself isn't true. And I know that it's painful to hear, But it's far more painful to pay the price tag that comes with believing a lie. And here's the price tag that comes with believing a lie. You're not free. And even though they weren't ready to embrace what Jesus said, even though they didn't want to hear it and they wouldn't accept it, they got what he was saying. Jesus was challenging their identity. He was challenging the story that they told themselves about themselves. If there is such a thing as a cultural sin today in our moment in history, one of the worst, one of the most egregious things you could do in our culture is challenge or question someone's identity. And yet Jesus approaches people. Jesus approaches us as one who has the authority to do just that, to question and challenge our identity, to question the story that we tell ourselves about ourselves. And they understood that's exactly what he was doing, so they responded like this: we are not illegitimate children. Can you feel the heat? Can you feel the tense nature of that moment? They protested. The only father we have is God himself. And Jesus said to them, if God were your father, you would love me. If you were really aligned with him, you would love me. For I've come from him. I've come from God. So I want to ask a question that's going to feel personal. It might even feel confrontational, but it should be safe because no one has to answer out loud. Does Jesus have permission from you to challenge the story you tell yourself about yourself? He doesn't need permission, but I'm talking about more on a relational level. Have you ever invited him? Jesus, I really want you to help me see reality, even if it's painful, because I want to be free. I've not come on my own. God sent me. Why is my language not clear to you? Because you are unable to hear what I say. You belong to your father, the devil. Ouch. You belong to your father, the devil. You don't even know what side you're on. And you want to carry out your father's desires. Do you remember in the beginning who he said, who is he talking to? He was talking to the ones who believed him, right? Doesn't that seem like that should be a pretty friendly crowd? Doesn't that seem like that conversation should be chill? This is a conversation with no chill. How do you make sense of that? How do we understand that? Has anybody ever tried to watch a game of cricket? This is like trying to watch a game of cricket. I have no clue what's going on. I need someone to explain it to me. If we were to pull back and read the entire chapter of John 8, we would see that there was a mixed crowd who was there that day. There are people who showed up who believed in Jesus. There are people who showed up curious with doubts. There are people who were full-on skeptics. And as Jesus was teaching and talking throughout chapter 8 of John, some people went from curious and skeptical, and they switched in the moment to believing in Jesus on the spot. And so Jesus is directing his teaching towards these people, to people who believed in him. But there were also people there who didn't believe in him. And so simultaneously, he has to answer their questions and their objections. And let's just be real. Even believers sometimes have big questions and objections that we got to work through. And this is just the way it was with Jesus. This was normal. This is the way it always was. Jesus taught believers and answered the questions and the objections of non-believers. Here at our church, we want to be devoted to Jesus. We want to be like Jesus. And if that's what Jesus was like, and that's what Jesus thought was best, we think we ought to do that too. And so we want to teach believers and simultaneously answer the questions and objections to people who don't yet believe, because that's how Jesus loved and engaged people. And getting back to the content of what Jesus was saying, he said, listen, guys, this is hard to hear, I know, but this is who your dad is. This is who you're aligned with. He was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, for there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native language. For he is a liar and the father of lies. Yet because I tell the truth, you do not believe me. Do you know what it takes for our commitment to truth to go up? our commitment to lies has to go down. That's how it works. That simple. For our commitment to truth to go up, our commitment to lies has to go down. And Jesus are dropping these words that are exploding like bombs. And they're hard to hear. They're hard to hear. If you joined us last week, or if you watched online last week, you might remember that we said this: God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Humility is the ability to say, I was wrong. I'd rather have the truth than save face and protect my ego. Humility is being able to say, Jesus, as hard as it is to hear, I believe you. I trust you. You're right. I'm stuck in it, and I need help to break free. Jesus, I trust you more than I trust me. And for those in the room who would say, Rick, I'm a follower of Jesus. I want to be devoted to Jesus. How do we know that that statement is true? I trust Jesus more than I trust myself. How could we gauge that? Here's a way. And I think it's based on really what Jesus had to say, because he talks so much about us making room for his word and his word being what sets us free. Here's how we know it's true. We trust him more than we trust ourselves. We study his word, and we structure our lives to align with his word. We study his word, and we structure our lives to be in obedience to what he said. And Jesus knew that the crowd, many in the crowd, were not ready to hear it. They weren't ready to receive it. So he said this: can any of you prove me guilty of sin? If I'm telling the truth, why don't you believe me? Whoever belongs to God hears what God says. The reason you do not hear is that you do not belong to God. And what Jesus is saying is, what is your case against me? Why is it that you're convinced I'm off the mark? What's your reasons for not believing? And for those in the room who would say, I'm a bit curious, I'm skeptical, I'm not ready to cross the line and say I believe in Jesus, have you been able to identify what your reasons are, what your obstacles to belief are? And I know this is an incredibly smart crowd, so if I'm talking to you, you've probably done that. This is the step that comes next. How do those obstacles to belief stack up against the case or the evidence in favor of trusting Jesus? We want to be the kind of church that if that's you, if you're trying to figure out and get questions answered and investigate, we want to be the kind of church where you can do that here, and we want to be your friends. We want to be the kind of church where it is okay to process, however long that takes. How long is that going to take you? I don't know. However long it takes. It's different for everybody. It's one of the reasons we have the value. You can belong before you believe. You don't have to think like we think. You don't have to act like we act to be welcomed and wanted here. Now, what I'm going to say next is for everybody. Jesus issues a challenge that not only puts the spotlight on him, prove him guilty of sin, but puts the spotlight on us. What would keep us from believing? And Jesus' challenge, I think, is this: investigate me and evaluate yourselves. Jesus is saying, investigate me. It's okay, do it. And evaluate yourselves. And we have just a couple of minutes left, and so I want to try to combine that into one step by asking this question: is it possible to experience authentic freedom apart from allegiance to Jesus? Is it even possible? Is it even possible to be free without submitting to him? And I get that's a tough question. And for some of us, we don't like, or we wrestle with the unflinching teaching of Jesus that we are impacted by sin, we're enslaved by sin, and we can't break free. I don't even like saying that about myself. I don't mind saying it about you, but I don't like saying it about me. Is it true? You might have a definition of right and wrong that's different from my definition of right and wrong. That's okay. We can all have our own definitions, and this series of questions we're going to do still applies. This is going to be a play along kind of thing. So you guys willing to play along? Put your hands up, let me see. All right, if someone doesn't have their hand up, they're being grumpy, look at them. All right. Tickle them. All right. Don't do that. How many of you, according to your own definition of right and wrong, you've known what you ought to do and on purpose said, I ain't doing it? Okay. How many of you guys have ever said, I know what I ought not to do, I'm just going to do it anyway? Okay, we've all done that. You guys are horrible people. How many of us would say, when it comes to the moral history of my own life, there are things that I did, and I felt shame over that? How many of us would say, there are things in my life, and I'm going to tell you right now, the answer is yes for me, Rick Henderson, it's yes, that I've done, I don't want anybody to know about. I don't think I could stand it being public information. Can anybody relate to that? How do you explain that? How do you explain we haven't disentangled ourselves from that? Not a one of us. We may disagree on what to call it. We may not like calling it slavery to sin. You can't call it freedom. And I know this feels a little bit like a pushy message, and I don't like to give those, but I'm going to ask you to keep leaning in with me. Even if someone were to say, listen, I am not a slave to me doing sin. How about this? How are we doing at disentangling ourselves from the impact of other people's moral choices? Who in here has had to experience things that you never would have chosen for yourself because of what somebody else did? How do you explain we can't disentangle ourselves from that? We may not agree on what to call it. I don't think you can call that freedom. If you were just to casually read the Bible, pick any part of the Bible and just read it casually, here's a theme that you're going to discover. Sin equals death. How are we doing at disentangling ourselves from that? I just don't think you can call that freedom. This is freedom that's offered by Jesus. This is freedom in the gospel. This is freedom in his kingdom under his authority. What we ought to do, what we want to do, what we're able to do, all come together. But here's the problem. When it comes to this, we're not able to do it. You all just told me what horrible people you are. But not only are we not able to fulfill this, there's an even bigger problem. We don't want to. And all we are left with is what we ought to do. So where is the good news? I love how the Apostle Paul talked about it in Romans 8. He said, therefore, there is no condemnation. Nothing is held against you. There is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. Because through Christ Jesus, the law of the Spirit who gives life has set you free from the law of sin and death. So this is where we're stuck. There's what we ought to do. There is God's law. There's the good and right things that emanate from who he is, and we can't fulfill it. But the good news of the gospel is that Jesus made us able. And let me be clear about this. If there's anybody like me that you come from a religious background, it's easy to mishear this. It's not that Jesus is our example and he's shown us how through our moral effort we can please God. Jesus, through his life and through his death, satisfied all the requirements of this. And he proved it with the resurrection. And just by trusting in him, because that's all we can do, by trust in him, receiving his grace, he makes us able. This is fulfilled because he fulfilled it for us. And when God looks at us, he doesn't see our moral imperfection, he sees Jesus' moral perfection. When God looks at us, he doesn't see our sin, he sees Jesus' righteousness. And now, if we are in Christ, if we trust in him, this is fulfilled. And he makes us able to start to live according to it. And his Spirit is in us, giving us a new heart, making us brand new, developing our affections to match who he is in his way, so that what we ought to do is something that we're able to do because of him, and now we want to do because of his Spirit at work in us. This is freedom. Where are you going to find it apart from him? If the Son has set you free, you are free indeed. This kind of freedom is indestructible. no matter what happens to you, this kind of freedom in Christ could never be taken away from you by someone else. This is the kind of freedom that is not diminished in times of adversity or sacrifice. I want to share with you what many people who are followers of Jesus have discovered about this kind of freedom. It is possible to give up something you are free to do without giving away your freedom. Anybody who's ever been in a meaningful relationship, you've discovered that, haven't you? This is why the Apostle Paul wrote this. You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be what? Free. But do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another. What's this word? Say it, don't say it humbly, say it confidently. Humbly. Who loves this word? I struggle with this word. I do. Would I be out on a skinny branch? Would I be out alone if I said this to you? Over the past year and a half, as we've watched the Christian community in the past year and a half, some have become hardened and some have become strengthened. And it is possible to become hard-hearted and weak in faith. And it's possible to become strong in faith and soft-hearted. And I think the difference is this: how we choose to use the freedom that we've been given in Jesus. Rather, serve one another humbly in love, for the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. These are the rails that we want to run on. This is the kind of freedom that we want to frame and guide the kinds of things we do as a church. So what I want to do is I want to talk about that for a second in the context of the ever-evolving COVID landscape. Over the past month, this is what we've seen. The average daily case numbers have gone from 2 a day in our county to, I think it's now over 60. We've watched school districts around the country and close by. And one of the things we're learning is this variant is impacting kids in a way we haven't seen kids impacted previously. We're taking in the data as it comes. We're listening to public health. We're conferring with our own medical experts. And so we're just at a place where we have to make a decision. How are we going to respond? What does it look like to exercise our freedom out of an attempt to humbly love and serve others? This is where we've landed. As church leadership, we've landed at, we're going to start asking people to wear a mask indoors in the month of September. And we're going to evaluate each month. But right now, we're just going to make a month-by-month commitment, and this is what we're asking. So this is what you're going to experience. At weekend services and our midweek Wednesday night programming, you're going to see just about every staff person and every volunteer wearing a mask. Why these times? Because this is when we have the highest concentration of unvaccinated kids in our building and medically vulnerable people in our building. And so we're doing this out of an attempt to do what's caring for unvaccinated kids and the medically vulnerable. And we're requesting, would you join us in that? We're going to let other people debate over mandates and recommendations and all that kind of stuff. This is just a request. Would you join us? And if it feels awkward right now because you came in without a mask and now I'm talking about this, you should not feel awkward because you didn't know I was going to say this today. So it's cool. And let me just say this. I get it, that there are some of us in this room, you might disagree with me, but you would say, Rick, of course we want to be humble. Of course we want to be loving. Of course we want to be wise. But you might say, Rick, I think another approach is more wise. And you could be right. I'm sure there are good-hearted, gospel-loving, incredibly intelligent people who will agree with you. The problem is we just got to land somewhere. We got to make a decision. And after processing the data, listening to public health, conferring with our own medical experts, this is where we've landed. And I'm asking, would you join us in this? Would you join us in this out of just a desire to love and a desire to be unified? We are not saying good Christians wear masks and bad Christians don't. This is not going to be a shaming place, so just leave your judgy pants at home. We just kind of want to do our best to love and care and be wise. And so this is where we've landed. And out of a desire for unity, would you be willing to join us? The reason that Paul wrote this, that it's possible to do this kind of thing, we're not giving away our freedom, we're actually exercising it. The reason that he said, do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh, rather serve one another humbly in love, is because this is how Jesus loved us. This is how he loves us. This is what the cross was all about. And so I want to close today, and I want to close this entire series with this question. Will you trade in autonomy for allegiance to Jesus? For those of you who have been considering Jesus and you've never trusted him, would you give up self-governance to submit to his kingship? For those of us who are followers of Jesus, would we remind ourselves that this is where freedom and joy is found?